we're saying. Okay, then I will proceed. I want to welcome excellencies, ambassadors, diplomats, professors, experts, and friends to today's webinar, which, as I think everybody knows, is entitled The Belt and Road Initiative is the Road to International Development, Peace, and Security. My name is Stephen Brawer. I'm the chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. And it will be my pleasure to moderate this important event today. We live in very challenging times. And the spirit of cooperation and understanding are dependent on successful economic development. The BRI is a global development initiative unprecedented in modern times and history. As it continues to grow and expand, its successful story in present world history, will the nations of the EU and Europe choose to embrace it and recognize the benefits, not only for the world's developing nations, of which 150 have already indicated their willingness to join and cooperate, but actually for the economies of Europe as well. This will be the theme, and it will be discussed in greater detail today by the panelists. And I'm very happy to begin by introducing our most special guest, His Excellency Ambassador Cui Aimin, the Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Sweden. Ambassador, please, you have the words.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, good morning. It gives me great pleasure to attend this webinar. The Belt and Road Initiative is the road to international development, peace, and security. On behalf of the Chinese Embassy in Sweden, I wish to extend my congratulations to the webinar, my appreciation to its organizer, BRIX, and my thanks to the guests attending and contributing to the webinar. In 2013, President Xi Jinping proposed the initiatives of the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. Since then, a new chapter of development of China and the world has been opened. Though the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, was proposed by China, it belongs to the whole world. Over the past 80 years and more, acting on the principle of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits, China has been working with other countries to promote the high quality development of the BRI. The BRI cooperation is increasingly more robust and productive, and has received warm and extensive support from the international community. The BRI friend circle is getting bigger. China has signed over 200 cooperation agreements with 149 countries and 32 international organizations. As an immensely popular global public good and the largest platform for cooperation, the BRI is increasingly attractive to cooperation and internationally influential. In Greece, the once almost bankrupt port of Piraeus has been revitalized and become the world's fastest growing container port. In Laos, the China-Laos Railway, passing through steep mountains and turbulent rivers, has made the landlocked Laos into a land-linked country. In Belarus, the Great Stone Project has brought a modern industrial park to the local community. In Senegal, the China-aided rural well drilling project benefits 1/7 of Senegal's population. A long list of such cooperation projects have been implemented and are delivering real benefits to the BRI participating countries and their people. The record of BRI has been impressive. Between 2013 and 2021, trade per year between China and other BRI countries has increased from $1.04 trillion US to $1.8 trillion US. China has cumulatively invested $161.3 billion US in BRI countries, and the latter have set up 32,000 companies in China with an investment of $71.2 billion US. China's investment in building economic cooperation zones in BRI countries has reached $43.08 billion US, creating 346,000 local jobs. Amid an ongoing pandemic and a turbulent international situation, China-Europe freight train, despite difficulties in the global flow of goods and transport capacity, has conducted over 50,000 trips, connecting over 180 cities in 23 European countries. It has been conducting over 1,000 trips per month for 24 months in a row. The China-Europe freight train, with its stability, reliability, and efficiency in logistic services, offers a strong support to the global industrial chains and supply chains, and injects strength and confidence in the open cooperation and economic recovery of the world. Since the pandemic began, China has provided over 2.2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to more than 120 countries and international organizations, many of which are to BRI countries, which supported their efforts to fight the virus. The BRI cooperation has bright prospects, beginning with economic cooperation, but extending far beyond. The BRI is increasingly a platform for improving global governance. It has made tangible progress in broad areas such as business projects, people-to-people connectivity, and cultural exchanges. To defeat the pandemic, we forged a health Silk Road to contribute to the global battle against the virus. To ride the wave of digitization, we proposed the Digital Silk Road to provide new momentum for the global economic growth. To expedite a low-carbon transition, we paved the Green Silk Road to facilitate a green global economic recovery post-pandemic. Every branch that extends from the BRI response to a challenge of our times. They not only bring real dividends to the BRI participants, but also contribute wisdom and strength for the world to rise up to challenges, create opportunities, and strengthen confidence. The BRI also builds bridges for China-Sweden cooperation, especially green cooperation. Despite the pandemic, trading goods between China and Sweden last year reached a new record of over $20 billion, up 17%. In areas of business, science, and technology, new energy, and environmental protection, there are bright prospects and tremendous potential to China-Sweden cooperation. As a supporter of multilateralism and free trade, Sweden maintains close cooperation with many BRI countries. The BRI, with its focus on green cooperation, may well bring China and Sweden together as green cooperation partners. Sweden has advanced technology and expertise, and China has entered a new stage of green, low carbon, and circular economic development. With its unmatched strength in its market and resources. When China and Sweden join hands to deepen green cooperation, a lot can be achieved in reducing pollution and carbon emission, as well as protection of biodiversity. Our cooperation may also create more opportunities for other BRI countries for their respective strengths to complement each other, to achieve win-win results and make contributions to the global sustainable development. Our world today is living through accelerating changes unseen in a century and still unchecked pandemic. They confront humanity with unprecedented challenges and ever-pressing peace and security problems. In a world that is overshadowed by the dark clouds of Cold War mentality and power politics, and beset by constantly emerging traditional and non-traditional security threats. Some countries attempt to expand military alliances to seek absolute security, stoke bloc-based confrontation by coercing other countries into picking sides and pursue unilateral dominance at the expense of others' rights and interests. Factors such as sanctions and decoupling result in disruptions to global industrial and supply chains, sustained hikes in commodity prices, and weaker international monetary and financial systems. All this have cast a shadow over development worldwide and pose threats to global peace and development. In the face of a complex international landscape, President Xi Jinping proposed a global development initiative last year, calling for building global development partnerships that feature unity, equality, balance, and win-win cooperation, with an aim to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to facilitate global development that is more robust, green, and healthy. President Xi Jinping also recently proposed the Global Security Initiative, advocating a vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, which follows the philosophy that humanity is an indivisible security community and aims to create a new path to security that features dialogue over confrontation, partnership over alliances, and win-win over zero-sum, bringing more stability and positive energy to the world. Over the past 80 years, from the BRI to GDI and the GSI, and in its response to the question of the times, peace or war, development or recession, openness or isolation, and cooperation or confrontation, China has time and again provided public goods for the world and used its concrete efforts to act on its commitment of building a community with a shared future for mankind. Despite the unprecedented challenges facing human society and a new phase of instability and transformation for global development, people around the world are even more keen about pursuing peace, development, and cooperation. As President Xi Jinping points out, development is a timeless theme for humanity. Only through continuous development can the people's dream for a better life and social stability be realized. The BRI pursues openness, inclusiveness, and win-win results, upholds the principle of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits, and aims for high standards, sustainable, and people-centered progress, which echoes with the aspiration of the people around the world. As the BRI becomes extensively implemented, the interconnectivity and win-win practical cooperation enabled by the initiative will deliver more benefits to economic growth and people's well-being. It will contribute more to high-quality economic development and shared prosperity, as well as world peace and stability. With that, I wish the webinar a full success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Important words for our viewers and participants to reflect upon. As I now want to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Henry Tillman, who is the founder and chairman of the China Investment Research. I again emphasize, as I think should become more and more clear, that the inevitability of the rise of China and of Asia is not something that can be reversed. It is something that can be embraced in the spirit of cooperation, and hopefully this will be the choice of Europe and Western powers to cooperate as this goes forward. I would now introduce our next speaker, Henry Tillman, who will elaborate based on his own work and research as to how much the development of the Belt and Road and its aspects are moving forward. So please, Mr. Tillman.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all for having me today and for your time. What you're going to see is a compilation of data we have. We have over 250,000 data points on the BRI, even going back pre-BRI. So it will build upon what you've seen, what you've just heard with specifics and a bridge to Professor Chen, who will get into the transportation in much more detail. So we're a bridge between the two. Thank you. Let's see if I can share my screen here. If not, Hussein, you may have to. You'll have to, Hussein, you'll have to upload my slides from your end, Hussein. It's blocked on this side. I can't share, it's blocked. Oh, sorry, I got it. Thank you. Thank you. Just a second. Just a second. Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Let's canter through these. We only have 20 minutes. The first one's pretty easy because it was covered in detail by the ambassador. But what's really driving me here is I was permitted to be able to listen to President Xi's speech on CCPIT's 70th anniversary celebration. As you see, there were 4 key points already set out before. And then I looked for specific cases throughout the world on points 1, 2, and 3, 2 in particular on green. So you'll see as we go through these maps, we point out innovation, green, vaccines. We mention a coup and a war just to show the orders of the map and the importance of it. And we also note the Abraham Accords and the recent movements in the Middle East embracing Asia. So the first slide is, I'm not going to go in detail, but I label this both a green initiative and an innovation initiative. For innovation, you just heard from a green initiative, this is electric rail. And ultimately, you see, you see 3 lines across the top, the middle route and the southern route through here. I'm not going to go through those, but I did want to point out there's a coup attempt in Kazakhstan, right in the center of one of those lines, a coup attempt, more than an attempt, in Pakistan, important on that southern route, and there's a war actually in Ukraine, which is also important to that route. And why is that important? You say, why would this happen after 2020? There's your answer. So in 2011, there were 17 crossings. In 2021, there were over 15,000. As you heard the ambassador just say that they're running over 1,000 a month. So if you look at the success of going across there and look at the blockages there, rather tactical, I would say. But I don't want to spend time on that, just to show you. And I consider this, and ultimately, in my opinion, that route, there'll be a much faster route by 2030, and most likely through southern parts of this picture. I consider this also, Turkey, to be both innovation and greening. Innovation, because that's the BTK line. First of all, you see it's a lot faster through BTK, and it's not blocked from a Ukraine situation, and it's not blocked from the south. It's purely functional, already functional. And BTK from Baku through Tbilisi into Turkey, then of course into Greece and up, is already functional, and it's a lot faster. And I also note the green part of Turkey, because a lot of that is now not only solar, but it's also waste to energy. I think 1/4 of Istanbul is now powered by waste to energy. And of course, most recently, and for some period of time, Iberia has been a recipient of Chinese investment, both Portugal and Spain. More recently, 2 large solar investments by Three Gorges in the last year. By the way, our firm specializes in technology and in solar, so we follow this quite closely. So again, if I look here, Istanbul, a key point of the BRI, and obviously Spain, Portugal as another key point. Again, green and innovation. This is a slide I show frequently. I first showed this in October 19. And the reason I show it is because I want people to see there's so much noise in the media. The price difference between Russian oil, Russian LNG, by the way, LNG was 60% less hydrocarbons than fuel. You see the price differential to Europe and the price differential to Asia. Yes, from a US perspective. So I give President Putin full marks for taking a bet in 2004 when none of this happened, and said we could actually produce LNG at record levels somewhere down the road. And they're en route to producing at 2024 levels of Qatar. And then many countries, Japan, China, India, and many countries in Asia will be powered by this cheap energy. But I just want people to show, well, you don't see on television this chart. These are real numbers from as you see from both Bloomberg and Rosneft. And so you see the pricing differential, which is why even Japan is saying, despite the political ties they have, they're still using this Russian oil because they need to power their countries. Again, we see this as innovation because President Putin took this bet such a long time ago. And certainly it's not where it needs to be, but it's a lot better with LNG than we are with regular fuel, as you know. I don't want to go through this because I know Professor Chen is an expert at this, but just to flag the things we talked about before. Again, innovation, as President Xi said. So you look at, from first of all, opportunistically, you see that Myanmar, which has seen a lot of its flows disappear post the coup in February of last year, has now seen, and I think the answer is around 7 billion of flow now in progress from China, and that had been blocked. This is the second time China has come into Myanmar. The first time was after the coup in 1988. So first of all, it's opportunistic. Secondly, if you look at the vaccines throughout the region, every one of these countries either certainly has Chinese vaccines, and in many cases are manufacturing vaccines. Singapore should also be in there as both as a vaccine hub, and that's being funded by a U.S. private equity firm. So it is quite global, not just Asian and not just Chinese. And of course, innovation, there's loads of innovation in Singapore. I'd point out two particular things of innovation. One is the world's first 5G AI hospital is actually in Thailand, not in the West. And the world's first blockchain stock exchange in the world is based in KL, in offshore KL. So you see, there's plenty of innovation in Southeast Asia not being led by the West. But again, see, it ticks all the boxes we saw of what President Xi had said. We then go to the Caribbean and Latin America. As you know, the 650 million people that are in these parts, Brazil and Mexico represent half of that population. If you look at Brazil, you've seen both. You've seen innovation and green, both in hydro, in various forms of renewables. You've also seen vaccines in Brazil. You've seen vaccines, also a Chilean hub, a vaccine, Argentina vaccines, green in Chile. Chile is a world leader in sustainable finance, especially the bonds they issued earlier this year. And of course, you see Mexico. So there's a big influence, not just in Southeast Asia, and consistently aligned. I haven't gone to the infrastructure, which was discussed before, i.e. major port in Peru, et cetera. But again, these are fully aligned with what President Xi said in his speech just last month. This is what I want to spend a little time on, basically. First of all, to pick up the ambassador's point, this is rapidly moving areas. So basically, none of these vaccine hubs existed 24 months ago. The Abraham Accords itself was not even formed until late 2020. So you look how much movement already you're seeing across all this area, and also capital flows are moving very quickly. So for example, we're now seeing capital flows both from China into Saudi and Saudi into China. That's happened this quarter, but we've not yet published it yet. We've seen strong flows between Saudi and UAE into Indonesia and Malaysia. That's also new. And then, of course, among the Abraham Accord countries, you see strong flows among those countries themselves. For example, Morocco has been a big part of this. Egypt is playing a major role. So even to show how much this has moved just in vaccines, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, and UAE, those four countries can provide roughly 2 billion doses of Chinese vaccines manufactured in their countries. Not only manufactured there, distributed there, and also teaching people how to use them there. For example, Johnson & Johnson built a vaccine lab in South Africa and had no users. The way these are arranged in these countries is actually have people to show them how to use it, encourage them to use it, and they're local. I might also point out, I don't have it in here, we just finished some work for Bangladesh, and I want to give them a little shout out here because basically they also have vaccines and are working hard on renewables with China. But also you hear these stories of should we choose China or should we choose USA? And Bangladesh is, I think, has done a fantastic job of balancing. The leading investor remains to be Japan, China number 200, Korea just behind that, USA behind that, UAE behind that. So it's a portfolio. So that like we're seeing a portfolio approach to vaccines in Indonesia or a portfolio approach to vaccines in other countries. The same is true with investments in these places. So I get so drawn aside by these commentators, I guess, one versus another, or when, it's not a win-win. And so I just highlight the fact that there's a lot more collaboration and a lot more thought that goes into this than what we normally, hear or see in the media. And I want to just end it. I know I've been told for 25 years, you always say, end your presentation with a big red thank you to a Chinese audience. But I'm deviating it, so I'm apologizing in advance because I run an autistic choir. During lockdown, one of them came up with write a musical about, and the catchy phrase within it is "One people, one planet." It's a little different from what the ambassador said, but it means the same thing. And I think, and I remain focused or convinced that health and green are the drivers of this, and fully aligned again with what the ambassador said and also what we heard from President Xi. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tillman. We will move now to our next speaker. Before we do that, I will just emphasize that what you have seen in detail in a rather short version, but a clear picture of reality, is the type of thing that has to be actually spread internationally in order to define reality for people who are unfortunately being denied that. Reality, as it was portrayed quite well now by our speaker, by Ambassador, these things are necessary in order to recognize how the world is changing. And it's very important that this message can be brought forth to many listeners and participants around the world, as well as the participants that have joined us today. So I will now be happy to introduce Professor Chen, who is the Director of Urban Studies Program and Distinguished Professor of Global Urban Studies and Sociology at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, in the United States. And please, Professor, you're welcome to present your presentation.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Stephen and Hussein and the BRI Institute Sweden for organizing this very timely and globally significant event. It's also very nice to follow the ambassador since his inspiring words, and also always good to hear my friend Harry Tillman to really always bring something very insightful about less known, less studied, understood aspects of BRI. So I hope what I can do is to draw a little bit from my ongoing research from a variety of local places, cities and regions inside China, across the border, into the neighboring countries, and from other places to reinforce and maybe elaborate a little bit of the important points both the ambassador and Harry have touched on. So if I can share my screen as well. Hope everybody can see it. You know, I used the title, China's Return to Eurasia. Really like to emphasize the continuity, you know, from the Asian Silk Road to the New Silk Road under the economic belt overland connection between Asia and Europe, but also highlighting the theme of the webinar, you know, this new global development idea proposed by President Xi. But I'd like to emphasize how we think about China's returning to Eurasia. Many would say China has never left Eurasia. Geographically, it's always been part of the Asia end of the Eurasia continent. But what we're seeing over the last decade or so, as BRI has unfolded and become more and more accepted and successful, that we're seeing that it has been disrupting a number of established dyadic categories, simple, you know, two black and white categories, right? So when we think about China and Europe, I'd like to emphasize there are different parts of Europe that we're talking about that have changed both before and BRI in connection to China, and different parts of Asia, the countries around China immediately, and the countries in Western Asia that Henry also touched on, right? In the Middle East, in North Africa, some would broadly defend that as West Asia. And also, I think we're seeing BRI also blurring, collapsing, reconnecting, reconfiguring categories of past and present in terms of time, change and development, transformation. And we often talk about what is global and local. And also very importantly, the thinking about new connectivities between land and sea. The ambassador mentioned about landlocked laws now being land linked through the China Laos Railway. And of course, the differences and the disconnectivities between very well-developed coastal cities of China and other countries and the marginalized, left behind places in the border regions are also being connected. So this is a map of the older, earlier global urban regional corridors. There are about 60 to 70 of them, according to 3 scholars who mapped this out. And they argue that they mostly existed, within more advanced developed countries and the major cities in the developing countries. They usually only link about 2 cities, 2 major cities, and also they're generally much shorter, and they tend to be developed from the bottom up, driven by market forces, as opposed to be more government planning, government directed. Now, if you look at the BRI corridors, this is a very familiar map to many, and then we can see these 6 cross-border regional economic corridors are much longer and wider. They're touching the countries across Eurasia that previously looked empty. They're vacant in the previous map. And of course, we have also seen these corridors connecting many more marginalized border regions and smaller cities, medium-sized cities, in addition to the global international hubs that we call global cities. And then in thinking about BRI, there are different approaches, right? Well, the Western media, lots of scholars in the world tend to see BRI as a state-driven or Chinese state-driven geopolitical strategy. But I would like to emphasize the combination of 2, 3, and 5, which refers to BRI as a powerful round of new regionalization, and also is a global urban question because it's disrupting the existing global urban hierarchy by creating horizontal connections across multiple borders, reconnecting, recreating newly organized global systems, especially in the developing countries. And most importantly, we talk about BRI also is a very ambitious initiative to introduce geologistics, logistics across space and the impact on economic development. Now, when we think of BRI, we really have to take into account the rapid transformation of China's regions before BRI, long before BRI. From 1980 to about 2000, we saw a very critical turn to the East Coast cities, developing the special economic zones like Shenzhen and other major coastal cities. And then from around 2000, the late 1990s, that we saw a very significant strategic turn to the West, the Great West Development, right? 西部大开发. So with this turn, I think China has been able to mobilize a lot of policy and economic resources to encourage the coastal cities, the cities in the center of the country, and the less developed, more neglected Western cities to reconnect, to jointly cooperate for development, which allow BRI to be developed, prepared, and to connect the cities and countries further west of Western region China, particularly Central Asia, and of course, Europe. Now, we have also to keep in mind, in the 1960s, we also had a short period of of third front development, which actually laid some foundation for the cities in Western China to host the strategic industries that were relocated from coastal cities like Shanghai to Chongqing, which now has turned out 30, 40 years later to actually play a very important role in reconnecting China, its Western region in particular, and Europe. Now we see these interior regions of China have also been tasked by the central government to specialize and focus on connecting different parts of the BRI. And this is very critical because we see this is a very large region, sparsely populated, lots of resources, but have been falling behind and they are catching up. So when we're thinking about the infrastructure logistics driver of the BRI, we also need to take into account the urban dimension and the industrialization dimension. So with infrastructure corridors like the China-Europe Railway, both the ambassador and Henry referred to, and then we can see what are the immediate and long-term impact on urbanization, on the redevelopment of cities, on the addition of new functions to existing cities like Xi'an, and this long-term sustainable industrial development. So Henry has already shown this, so I'm going to skip it. But when we're thinking about reconnecting cities, and I'm an urbanist, a student of the cities, I've studied Chinese cities and other Asian cities for over 30 years, started with Shenzhen, and now we're seeing the China-Europe freight train have connected cities from the Great Bay Area, Dawanqu, all the way through Central Asia to Western China, Central Asia, and to Western Europe. And then we see the smaller border cities of Xinjiang, Neimenggu, and Heilongjiang become new international logistics hubs that help channel and transship trains from multiple cities within China. Now, 24 provinces of China, over 80 cities are connected with over 100 cities in Central Asia and Western Europe. Henry has already seen this, but I just wanted to emphasize over this entire decade of the development of China-Europe freight train, which is a flagship project BRI, over 50,000 freight trains have crossed the Eurasia continent. And we have also seen a more balanced run of trains both going east and west, as the blue bars have now gradually caught up to the orange bar, which are the eastbound trains. And we have seen more cities that are often not very well known internationally, in both northern China, central China, and east coast of China, like Fujian, for example, now are sending trains going west. And they are going through Xi'an, Chengdu, and Chongqing because they are the Jijie Zhongxin that are being consolidated, repackaged, reloaded, and then going west to different countries, different markets. We see the very small city near Yiwu by Chinese standard, near Shanghai, but it's the world's largest small merchandise sourcing center and being now connected all the way to Madrid in Spain. So if you're thinking about the distance of the Asian Silk Road, the longest distance will be about 5,000 kilometers, and this is 13,000 kilometers, more than twice as long as the Asian Silk Road, now connecting cities that previously were unimagined to be connected. And we've also seen, talking about Sweden, the brand name of Volvo cars, the cars made in China, the XC60, which is the two above photos, and they're taking the train from Xi'an going to the Belgian port of Ghent to be sold in the European markets. And the more expensive, larger XC90s, the black cars in the two lower photos, are coming back on the same train from Europe to be sold in large interior cities in China, where consumers really desire these very nice cars. And then, of course, most recently, I'm going to bring this to a close, and we see the Asian city that anchored the Asian Silk Road of Xi'an have developed the new German express that have connected to the city of Cologne. I'm currently in the city of Mainz, very close to Cologne. And then you see the distribution, redistribution of these trains, not just coming into the most important gateway city of Duisburg, further north, but also creating new alternative express routes that allow more European cities, to receive the cargo, traded goods from China and also exporting to China. Now, Henry talked about the China Laos Railway, and so did the ambassador. I just like to highlight the China Laos Railway, not talking about its details, its immediate local regional impact across the border from China to Southeast Asia, but to highlight its importance and reconnection to Eurasia, the entire Eurasian freight trade, and now being connected separately between Western China and Europe, and also between southwestern China and Southeast Asia, and also now more cities in northern China, eastern China have used the newly opened China Laos Railway to send their trains to Kunming, because as we know, China-ASEAN trade is the largest trade, and of course ahead of a China-EU trade, and now Kunming, the northern terminus of China Laos Railway, becoming this funnel that receives lots of the Chinese exports to Southeast Asia through Laos to Thailand and beyond. And again, coming back to Chongqing, we have seen Chongqing, which was an interior major city that was partially helped develop during the Third Front movement, but then falling behind during the early 20 years of reform opening, now has also been revitalized to becoming the most important hub to receive the trains coming back from Europe and sending them on to Southeast Asia through Guangxi province. And then of course, finally, just to reinforce the points made by Henry, that we're seeing not only the continuation of the trains from Xi'an going through the established lines to Russia and even Belarus and into Poland, we're seeing the new alternatives that are going through the Caspian Sea and then Turkey. And we also see the newly emerging possibility of both Caspian Sea and the Black Sea being reconnected through both intermodal transportation between land and sea. So my earlier point about land-sea connections in multiple places in the world played an important role. So with that, I'd like to thank the audience for your attention and interest.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Chen. A very enlightening picture of the development perspective. I will only add a certain irony that this kind of successful development, which you elaborated on very clearly, ironically, was in fact the basis for the actual internal development of the United States under a previous period where the Transcontinental Railroad was the state-sponsored infrastructure that actually led to internal improvements in the United States. Now, that was under the Lincoln administration to begin with, but that model of internal development through state-sponsored infrastructure was the model that actually functioned in developing the United States. So the criticism of state-sponsored infrastructure, which seems to be coming from certain circles, is a failure to recognize the successful form of development that actually has characterized real development and elimination of poverty and global and city development, for example, in the interior parts of the United States, which were not developed until the Transcontinental Railroad was initiated. So this model is not new, it has functioned, and it should in fact be a rational basis for cooperation now between East and West. But unfortunately, Western thinking has abandoned that kind of infrastructure perspective, and consequently, we see a general breakdown of infrastructure here in the West. But thank you so much for your points, because it highlights the reality of how that process goes forward. I would also like to, at this point, recognize and welcome the diplomats that have registered, the ambassadors who have joined us from several nations, Belarus, Ecuador, Zimbabwe, I believe several others, Laos. There are perhaps 4 or 5 others that I have not got the direct list at the moment, but I want to welcome all the diplomats who are attending, and we're very grateful for your participation, and you will most clearly have the possibility of making some comments during the question and answer period. With that, I would also like to welcome our guest from Germany to make some short remarks on he is Uwe Behrens, doctor, is a well-known German transport expert with direct experience of many years of work in China. He is a great China expert and has written several books about China's development and also on the Uyghur population in Xinjiang province. So I will welcome you, Dr. Behrens, for making some short remarks, and thank you so much for participating.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation, dear guest, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's for me today indeed an honor to participate in this webinar, especially here from Germany, since last weekend, the summit of the G7 countries took place, and during the summits, certain decisions were done by, or were concluded by the member or the government representatives and presidents and a chancellor of the G7 countries. For me, as a transport expert, of sure was it always important to explain the global development of the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, since through the connectivity between Asia, Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, the political and economical center moves more and more to east, away from the Western countries, from the former colonial countries, the today G7 countries. This is of sure a big challenge for those countries, and they try everything to, at first, to spread bad rumors, bad information about the Belt and Road Initiative. And since this didn't work, and the Belt and Road Initiative was very successful, as we heard from the speaker before me, they try now to be more active. So they launched during this G7 meeting the so-called Partnership Global for Infrastructure and Investment. 1 year ago, they launched already the Build Better World Bank and the Global Gateway from the EU countries. But in this 1 year, actually not much happened. Just the opposite happened. Due to this Ukraine conflict, the G7 countries tried to force the global south to make a decision, either to stay to the west or to stay to Russia to China. And when we see this, all the countries, all the global South countries don't like to make those decisions. They are interested to develop. They're interested to cooperate with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. This we can see when in March, this Russian military action towards Ukraine should be condemned on 2nd of March. 141 countries were pro and 40 countries against. But when the decision was should be done to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council, only 93 countries were pro to expel Russia and 82 against, respective sustained their voice. But more interesting for me is, last week, the Ukrainian President Zelensky wanted to talked to the African Union, to all members of the African Union, but from this over 50 countries, only 5 countries attended this speech. So they're really not interested to make a decision to go to with Russia or to go with China and Russia or with the West. They want to develop and they want to solve the problems as hunger, to solve the problems hunger through infrastructure, through energy problem, solving the energy problems. So instead now that the G7 are launching those new initiatives, it would be better to work together with China to solve these problems in Central Asia, Southeast Asian countries, and in Africa, as well as in Latin America. When we have a look on the areas where this new initiative should focus on, so there are 4 areas mentioned. One is climate resilient infrastructure and clean energy supply chain. What does it mean? Clean energy supply chain. It means that the Western countries would like to build up green energy parks, solar or wind parks, and transfer the energy to Europe to solve the energy problem which is building up now in Europe because of the sanction against Russia. The second point is secure information and communication technology. Oh, sure, this is very necessary, and China did in the frame of the Belt and Road Initiative many things built up in several countries in Africa already, this G5 technology. In Africa, you everywhere have this Chinese mobile phones. It's very successful. When I see what happened in Germany, I, especially here in my place, suffer always on a so-called Funkloch. So I have no signal for my handy. It will be very difficult for the Western countries to provide more than what is China doing now, and that would be the only way to do something together. The next point, the third point to focus on is advanced gender equality and equity. When I think the decision of the Supreme Court in USA, so sounds this actually quite hypocritically. I think the countries in the global South are in this aspect already much wider or much more developed than the Western country, or especially the USA. And the fourth point is upgrading the infrastructure of health systems. Yes, this is necessary. China did it and is doing it in the frame of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Western countries should work together instead to try to launch an initiative to invest 600 billion US dollar just against the Belt and Road Initiative. This is the wrong way. This will lead to more friction between the countries, and it will not help to solve the problem in the global south. So we have to raise our voice to ask the Western countries to cooperate with China, not to decouple, but to work jointly to solve the global problems. Thank you very much. This I just wanted to point out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Behrens, for your important ideas and remarks. Okay, I would like to now welcome our last speaker for the morning session, my colleague and the vice chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, Mr. Hussein Askary. He is an active journalist and writer who has addressed very important questions on exposing many myths about debt traps, which he has done in 2 recent articles, one on Sri Lanka and the other on Pakistan. I think that his contribution to maintaining a focus on reality is extremely important, as the general theme of this webinar is that reality has a way of intruding, whether people like it or not, into the circumstances that we are facing in the present time in history. So, Mr. Askary, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's a great honor for me to be in this esteemed panel and welcome all the excellencies, diplomats, and all the other guests. My presentation title is 4 Initiatives, 3 Principles, and 1 Troubled World. Because with the Ukrainian crisis erupting in February this year, the world entered a decisive crossroads. Talk of nuclear weapons and a 3rd World War is becoming commonplace, and that in itself is a dangerous sign. We have a global food crisis, energy crisis, and serious disruption of supply chains. The EU economy itself has fallen victim to the same sanctions it has imposed on Russia. In Germany, for example, the economy minister said last week that the German state may resort to rationing power supply to industries and households. Germany, as everybody knows, is the industrial engine of the EU and Europe. We had also the disruption of, if I may share, my screen here. We have also the disruption of the crucial China-EU Express Railway. Although Russian and Belarus railway companies are exempt from the sanctions don't deal with the Russian and Belarus railway companies. But while Chinese logistics companies continue to use this route, political pressure is keeping major European companies away from it. We all remember how important this great Belt and Road artery was for European nations during the COVID-19 pandemic, as Chinese supplies of medical equipment and protection materials were decisive in the fight against the pandemic here. Swedish and Finnish companies are left today with very expensive and time-consuming sea routes or air freight. Now, the world has clearly needs to choose a path in this juncture, but it cannot be the path of confrontation and war. It must be a path of peace, but what kind of peace and what should govern it? In this one troubled world, 3 important principles must be applied. 2 of them are historical precedents to the hard-won United Nations Charter, They are derived from the Treaty of Peace of Westphalia of 1648, which ended one of the bloodiest and cruelest religious wars in the history of Europe. That is the 30 Years' War. It followed another 100 years of religious wars, actually. These two principles are: one, the absolute sovereignty and independence of nations and nation states, and second, equality among nations, be they small, medium, or large. However, there is a third principle, and that is the right to development through cooperation and coexistence among nations. The right to development, which is enshrined in the Declaration on the Right to Development and adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in December 1986, is almost forgotten now. The Treaty of the Peace of Westphalia stressed that not only all old crimes and misdeeds by all parties must be forgiven in order to establish peace, but that nations have to strive and work for, quote, for the benefit of the other. So instead of competing and undermining each other for selfish interests, a behavior that can lead to new conflicts, nations must figure out a win-win strategy. That is the basis for peace through economic development. This was the vision presented already in I can show the next slide. Is it visible, the next slide?
The quote, yes.
Yes, okay. This was the vision presented already in 1967 by Pope Paul VI, who insisted in the encyclical Populorum Progresso that development is the new name for peace. He wrote then, quote, "When we fight poverty and oppose the unfair conditions of the present, we are not just promoting human well-being. We are also furthering man's spiritual and moral development. And hence, we are benefiting the whole human race. For peace is not simply the absence of warfare based on a precarious balance of power. It is fashioned by efforts directed day after day towards the establishment of the ordered universe, willed by God, with a more perfect form of justice among men." Earlier than that, US President John F. Kennedy stated in his famous commencement address at American University in Washington, D.C. on June 10, 1963, he said, quote, "What kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time." Now, unfortunately, we know what happened to President Kennedy. He was assassinated later that year, and the world was plunged into a spiral of never-ending wars, starting with the Vietnam War. But this spiral of war has to stop here because it reached a dangerous dead end. Now, speaking on June 22nd at the opening of the BRICS Business Forum, which precedes the two-day BRICS Summit in Beijing, the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, Chinese host President Xi Jinping clearly indicated that the world was at a major crossroads. He said, right now, the world is facing drastic changes and a pandemic, both unseen in a century, and various security challenges keep emerging. The world still faces strong headwinds and its path towards recovery. The global development has suffered major setbacks. Where is the world headed? Peace or war? Progress or regression? Openness or isolation? Cooperation or confrontation? These are the choices of the times that we are confronted with, President Xi said. Now, what I wanted, one important thing that happened at the BRICS summit in the final Beijing declaration actually the participants at point 9 reminded the world that there's a declaration of the right to development. And it said, quote, "We agree to continue to treat all human rights, including the right to development, in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing and with the same emphasis." So the idea of peace through economic development is the real principle that has to be part of any discussion of peace, not simply stopping war, not stopping putting down the arms, but without economic development, peace would be almost impossible. So now I have described these 3 principles. I would like to refer to the 4 initiatives launched by China in the past decade, which I believe are sound basis for cooperation among nations to achieve peace through economic development. And these 4 initiatives are the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, the Health Silk Road, launched in 2017, the Global Development Initiative, launched in 2021, and the Global Security Initiative, launched in April this year, 2022. These 4 initiatives taken together constitute a package that offers clear solutions and a safe escape from multiple crises the world is facing today, to not only achieve security on a global scale, but to sustain it too. But that requires that other nations and major powers join China. Now, the first one, the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, was launched in 2013 and has been a great success in terms of bringing, by now, more than 140 nations and 30 international organizations around the concept of economic cooperation based on bridging the gap, the huge gaps in development, especially financing and building infrastructure, which is an absolute necessity for any economic development process and alleviation of poverty. The BRI addresses the 3 bottlenecks of development, as President Xi Jinping expressed this in 2015 in the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. And these 3 bottlenecks are the shortage of capital, lack of infrastructure, and shortage of skilled labor. Now, I'm gonna publish this, but the fact that China has taken very real steps into creating financial institutions, banking institutions to finance infrastructure, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank of the BRICS, the Silk Road Fund, and so on and so forth. So the role of the BRI is to provide the tools of economic development to other nations. These are the same tools China itself used and developed in its amazing journey from poverty to prosperity. The second initiative is the Health Silk Road. In his speech delivered at the Legislative Chamber of the Uzbekistan Supreme Assembly on June 22nd, 2016, President Xi Jinping said, "We should step up efforts in deepening medical and health cooperation so as to jointly build a healthy Silk Road." Then in August 2017, Beijing hosted the Belt and Road High-Level Meeting for Health Cooperation towards a Health Silk Road. At the end of this conference, the participating 64 countries signed the Health Silk Road Communique. With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, China put the Health Silk Road into full implementation, providing medical equipment to many nations, including Europe and the United States. China has also helped close the vaccine gap between developed and developing countries. His Excellency, the Ambassador and Henry Tillman described this in full detail. So I'm not going to go through it, but the Health Silk Road is an important pillar of these 4. Then we have the third, the Global Development Initiative, presented by President Xi Jinping in the United Nations General Assembly, in which he reiterated that the fact is that the bridging the gap in lack of infrastructure and industrialization is key to bringing nations out of poverty. Now, the word industrialization is never mentioned in the mouth of Western leaders when they talk about Africa or Asia. They talk only about sustainable development, but we don't really know what that sustainable development is. And finally, the Global Security Initiative, which President Xi Jinping presented at the Boao Forum for Asia, last April, this whole, it's not only to prevent new global wars, and this came after the Ukrainian crisis, but to guarantee that a world community with a shared security and prosperity can be consolidated and sustained. Now, President Xi Jinping provided many points on how to avoid the conflicts, like adhering to the United Nations Charter and the principles I mentioned, but also emphasized the fact that it's very important to focus on economic cooperation, trade, and industrialization as a means to establish peace. Now, there is, so the idea, as I said, all these four initiatives, they constitute one package that has to be presented on a global level and discussed. And the key element here is, yes, we have security problems, but if we adhere to the UN Charter, the sovereignty and independence of nations and peaceful coexistence, that's a key element. But what needs to be discussed is the shape of the world economy, the global economic governance, and what kind of cooperation. I think the Belt and Road and these initiatives are a good example. Now, the final part of my presentation is, I call it we don't need to reinvent the wheel, because China by itself cannot solve all the problems of the world, but it has showed a clear path to a reasonable and provable good result, starting from pulling out 800 million of its people out of extreme poverty and building a world-class industrial system and a prosperous and optimistic society. Unfortunately, the United States, the EU, and the G7 come up with new slogans and so-called initiatives to counter the Belt and Road Initiative and the other initiatives presented by China. This week, the G7 launched the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. It was just a year ago in England that they launched Build Back Better World. But it seems that it's not only Mr. Biden has memory problems, but all the others. As I showed in a lengthy article last year on the Build Back Better World, it's not more than really hot air. You know, it's a package with expensive glossy paper and golden emblems of democracy, transparency, and private sector contributions. It will be soon forgotten, to be replaced in a year or two with a new fairy tale. So how do I know that? Well, this is what happened to earlier initiatives. We had the EU-Japan initiative to encounter the new Silk Road or the Belt and Road Initiative. We had the EU Connecting Europe and Asia strategy. Actually, this was simply a 14-page document and 2-page PowerPoint, which for some strange reason neglects the fact that China exists. And there are no railways, there are no roads, there are no ports, and no airports or any connectivity on this map. So that one is also forgotten. We had also the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which was a Japanese-Indian initiative to work together in Africa. It turns out that this was just one conference and a webinar or a seminar, and then there was just a website, but there are no projects, there are no financing, no clear vision presented. Last year, the European Union Commission Chairman Ursula von der Leyen presented the Global Gateway Initiative, which goes along the same lines of the Build Back Better World, and it will suffer the same fate. Now, there are more dangerous things being proposed, in the United States, like in the US Senate last year, in April last year, the Foreign Relations Committee passed a bipartisan resolution called Strategic Competition Act of 2021. That is competing with China's Belt and Road Initiative. It proposes to allocate $300 million each year for 5 years. That's $1.5 billion. To do what? Build railways, to build roads, to build hospitals in Africa and Asia? No. It is to train local journalists and NGOs on how to oppose the Belt and Road and China's influence. Now imagine if you take these $300 million and build modern hospitals in Africa every year in every African capital, I think the United States will become quite popular. But this money is being used to undermine the Belt and Road by smearing China, by putting out stories which I have already discussed and shown that they are not true. Now, what is wrong with all these initiatives and why do they fail? First, not only they are financially and economically flawed, but they are also far from the reality and what people around the developing world really need and aspire to achieve. Second, they are merely designed as political and media operations to encounter, defame, and undermine the Belt and Road without backing them with any substantial investments or serious alternatives. Now, the BRI works and it is good. If you want the proof, just check, 144 nations have joined it so far. And the more bad things being said about the Belt and Road, the more nations join it. So if you try to build a wall to contain the BRI, you will find yourself trapped inside a small circle. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Join the BRI. The world needs the technological and industrial potential which still exists in Europe and the United States to help rid the world of poverty, disease, and insecurity. Therefore, while the focus of many leaders in the world on a new security system that's urgent, it must be stated that unimpeded economic cooperation and trade among all nations must be at the core of such a security system. A community of a shared future for mankind with one humanity under one heaven and harmony with diversity is possible if we look at that which ties us together than that which keeps us apart. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Askary. I will just mention that there were several participants from the embassies that I would like to just mention that I didn't mention before. The Embassy of Kuwait is participating. The Embassy of Egypt is also participating. The Embassy of Iraq is also participating. The Embassy of Ecuador, as I believe I mentioned, Pakistan, and I believe Malaysia. Also Malaysia. So we're very grateful for their participation and certainly hope that the ambassadors or the diplomats that are participating and are available can ask questions or make some brief comments. We have time now to address questions. And I believe that there are certain questions that are written on the Q&A, but there might be others who wish to take this opportunity to ask the panelists, ambassador of China or any of the other panelists, please feel you can direct your questions now.
I got a couple of questions by email. They are addressed to His Excellency Ambassador Cui. First from Mr. Ulf Sandmark in Stockholm from the Schiller Institute. He says, Your Excellency, the cooperation between China and Sweden to address the pandemic has been very active. What are the highlights of this cooperation, and how do you see the possibility to extend this cooperation in international arena to develop the health Silk Road for providing a modern health system in all nations? I think this is the first question. Yeah.
第一个问题是席勒研究所的伍尔夫·桑德马克先生提出的，他就是说这个显论大使先生，中瑞在合作抗疫方面有很多的成果，你能否介绍一下中瑞合作抗疫方面有什么亮点，以及如何把这些努力加入这个健康“一带一路”的框架之内？
中国和瑞典呢，我们在这个疫情爆发的初期啊，两国的科学家进行了紧密的接洽和这个合作这个研究。像这个疫情发生以来，已经发表了上百篇的这个科技合作的论文和研究的成果报告。然后这些合作呢，为中国的抗疫乃至世界各个国家抗疫啊，都做出了积极的贡献。
Well, since the beginning of the pandemic, experts from China and Sweden have been working very closely and communicating very closely with each other, especially on research. And since the beginning of COVID-19, over 100 relevant essays and research papers have been published by Chinese and Swedish experts working together, making tremendous contribution to the global fight against the virus.
其实呢，这个疫情啊，是全人类的面临的共同的健康威胁和挑战。那么抗疫这种事情啊，因为它来的这个疫情啊来的特别的凶猛，和这个传播的非常的迅速，而且呢，这个致死率啊都相当的高，所以啊，它某种程度上呢，好像是更容易让不同的国家能够携手合作啊。但是我想说的是呢，不仅仅是在这个抗疫的领域，我们需要紧密的团结一致，而且在涉及到人类发展的其他的各个领域，我们其实都需要有抗疫合作这种精神和态度。
Actually, what I want to point out is that the COVID-19 pandemic is a common enemy facing the global public health. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it struck humanity hard with a relatively high death rate at a certain point. And to some extent, that actually provided momentum for different countries around the world to unite with each other. But what I want to especially say is that there are also more challenges facing humanity beyond just the pandemic. We also need to take the spirit that we forged in our common fight against the pandemic into addressing other challenges facing humanity.
因为这个世界啊，现在已经这个高度的关联和共生共存，所以没有一个国家呀能够这个独立的这个不跟其他国家发生联系而生存和发展。所以在这种情况之下呢，我们觉得呀，这个人类命运共同体这个理念，恰恰是能够很好的解决这个人类社会发展的问题和安全与进步的这个前景。
Also, we know the world we live in is a closely connected one. And the well-being of all countries rely tightly on each other. No country can develop or survive well just by itself in isolation. Therefore, we believe against such a backdrop, it is important that we carry forward the notion of a community with a shared future for humankind as a common solution for the challenges faced by humanity and as a momentum for us to uphold peace and security.
我们欢迎啊，所有致力于地区的和国际的稳定发展与和平的各种努力。我们不反对啊，我们非常欢迎，其实是各种的关于基础设施方面的这个国际上的这种倡议和合作。但是我们希望啊，这个无论是什么样的情况和原因，那么一定的是要为平等啊，相互这个尊重的平等基础上，能够实现这个互利合作，能够让各个国家呀能够这个平等的参与，也就是我们说的共商共建共享这么一个原则。同时，我们希望啊，不管是什么样的合作倡议。实实在在的，让老百姓都有一些成果，享受到这个实惠。
Hi, Mr. Askary, can you still hear us?
Now I hear you, yes.
Okay. Just now, the ambassador said that we welcome all efforts for regional and global stability and peace. We do not oppose, actually, we welcome all relevant initiatives that aim at improving global infrastructure. But we hope, no matter what kind of motives these initiatives come from, we hope they can uphold the principle of equal-footed participation by relevant countries, and also uphold the principle of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits, so that these initiatives can really contribute to the global cause of development of humanity, to really walk the walk instead of just talking the talk.
好，谢谢。
Thank you.
Just one note that the panelists can see the questions on the Q&A field there. If they wish to answer any of the questions there or in the chat, they are welcome to do it themselves, but there are other questions. For example, one which is addressed to Mr. Tillman on the progress of the vaccine co-production between China and developing countries. What is the status of that progress and how it will impact the future of this kind of work internationally, and also the future of pharma industry?
That's an enormous question, and it's an enormous thing that's happening, actually, and happening quickly. So thank you for the question. So at the end of June 2021, 29 BRI countries were authorized to produce vaccines, the Chinese vaccines locally. We tracked this and just published last month on this matter. There are 17 of those countries which have either started production or soon to start production by the end of 2022. And in addition to that, there are already 4 more countries which apply, now 33 countries. Our estimates that by year end 2023, that'll produce an incremental 5 to 6 billion additional vaccines to fill that vaccine gap, number one. Number two, as the Chinese mRNAs come on stream late this year and Q1 next year, they'll be distributed through those 33 countries ultimately as well to help, if you will, a booster on that basis. And then I think it's also worth, one second. Sorry. It's also worth noting that not only do these hubs produce just COVID-19 vaccines, but also loads of other vaccines, Hep A, Hep B, Zika, a number of other pharmaceutical needs. So somewhere down the road, this could be, I believe, over 50 countries with local production capabilities, lowering the cost of drugs. Some of the places last year were being charged $37 a jab in Africa by Western manufacturers. So the cost is lower, the effective rate's higher because they're local, and it will have an effect on disintermediating drugs around the world by being made locally. And this is something that's, I know from, I've been around people who've been around China for the last 50 years who've been saying this is one of the goals of China is to help control, well, if you will, drug prices down the road. Thanks for asking the question. It's monumental.
Thank you very much. That's enlightening. There are two questions related to each other. I think both Dr. Uwe Behrens and Professor Chen can answer them. I also have done some research on that, and that's on the first question is about which regions in China will be the most active in the communication with Europe along the Eurasian land bridge railway. I think Professor Chen answered that question implicitly in his presentation, but we have a question on how much the EU-China rail freight, the EU Express, which I mentioned and others mentioned, how much it was affected by the Ukrainian crisis. I can answer that question, but if Dr. Behrens has any comment on that railway connection.
The exact figures I unfortunately cannot say, but as I realized, this transportation via Russia, Belarusia to Europe or to Germany is dropping. For this, the middle corridor take more place and so now the operator and the logistic operator working on it to speed up the transportation via the middle corridor. So we have to observe it in the future, how it will develop. Definitely, this middle corridor will not replace the corridor via Kazakhstan, Belarusia, Poland to Germany. But we have to see that this traffic is going down at the moment. Figures, unfortunately, I don't have.
The middle corridor is the corridor which goes from Western China through Kazakhstan and then crosses the Caspian Sea on ferries, and then through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and then by ferries to Romania or Bulgaria, Varna and Constanta. That this was in the discussion for a long time, but it's very limited and it needs massive investments. I mean, it can take now 2% of what the Eurasian land bridge takes through Russia and Belarus. It's more advanced, more well organized, but this is a future option, but we need to diversify. We need even the corridor through Iran, if the sanctions on Iran are lifted, and through Iran, Turkey to Europe. I think China is open for all these options. It's not a geopolitical zero-sum game, but my knowledge is that westbound freight from China to the EU has continued under this crisis because, as I said, the Russian and Belarus railway companies who handle the traffic are not under sanctions. So European and Chinese companies can work with them. The problem is eastbound from Europe has come under political pressure because of the media barrage against Russia and Belarus. Many companies, for what they call ethical and moral reasons, they stop using this corridor through Belarus and Russia, but instead they have to either use air, which is very, very much expensive, or sea routes, which are taking more than twice the time than railway, but also have become very expensive in recent periods. So there is no alternative to this Eurasian land bridge for trade between. But yeah, Professor Chen, I can
add some real-time numbers here. I came well prepared to respond to this question. The first part of the question I would say is cities more to the western part of China, I think that have been locally more proactive, but also more steered by the central and provincial governments to engage Central Asia and Europe. For example, the city of Xi'an, it has been the site and the host of the Eurasia Forum, right, which is a very big international event, very well attended. But staying with the city of Xi'an, which continues to send about 2 trains every day along the established route, which is the Western route, which is Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, and Poland. But it was interesting to see at the very beginning of the war, of the conflict, there was a dramatic reduction in the trains leaving Xi'an going west, but it gradually rebounded. So far, from February 24th, when the conflict broke out, to June 24th, about 90 days after the beginning of the conflict, 192 trains have run across the Eurasian continent along the established route. 65 trains arrived in Duisburg, again, averaging 14 days, which is about the same time before the conflict. 45 trains arrived in Hamburg, and 26 trains arrived in Rostock, all in Germany. And then we have 24 trains that crossed Belarus Brest into Malashwitz, 24 trains, and then 24 trains also came through into Budapest. And we have a couple, smaller number of trains arriving in other places. So that's the established routes. So, of course, the conflict raised the risk, and some shippers, logistic companies declined not to use it, which also, of course, elevated, the insurance, right? So the Xi'an municipal government-run international logistics companies offered to cover the elevated risks, elevated insurance premium, which helped mitigate some of the risks. And of course, the other impact is, of course, the conflict forces the rerouting of the trains, via Turkey, and of course also the Black Sea route that Hussein mentioned. But these are much more time-consuming and more costly because it involves intermodal BRIX, land and sea. And unless there's greater volumes that would justify, investment into these new or alternative routes, they will be very limited.
Okay. Thank you very much for the detailed response. There's a question from Mr. Ture Westby. He's saying China's policy is cooperation, not confrontation. Followingly, should not China seek to cooperate with the G7's Global Infrastructure Investment Initiative? I think His Excellency Ambassador Cui may want to answer that question, since it's a policy of Chinese government to seek to cooperate with these initiatives launched by the EU and the United States and G7.
斯比先生给大使的提问是，中国的立场是求合作，而不是求对抗。因此，中国是否是对参与 G7 集团提出的 PGRI， 也就是全球基础设施投资协议这样的倡议，有持开放态度？
其实刚才我已经提到了这个话题，就是凡是所有有利于这个地区啊和国际啊这个 和平、稳定和发展的这种努力，我们都非常欢迎，我们都持积极开放的态度。
Actually, I think I touched upon this point in my previous answer. That is, for all efforts or initiatives that are in the interest of global and regional peace, stability, and development. The Chinese side's attitude is an open one, a welcoming one, and a supportive one.
实际上，这个世界目前呢，地区发展有很大的一些不平衡和不确定，而且这个 热点的问题啊，各方面的这个冲突问题啊，也此起彼伏，始终没有停止过。所以，这个在构建这个世界发展有关的规划、实施有关的计划的过程当中啊，应该充分的考虑到各个地区、各个国家不同的情况，应该在这个相互尊重，是吧？这个 平等协商的基础上， 然后开展有关对话合作。
Well, the world we live in is one where different regions may have some inequalities and are experiencing some inequalities, and hotspot issues keep popping up one after another. Therefore, when we plan for development of the world and implement these plans, we need to bear in mind that different regions have different realities, and we need to carry out relevant dialogues and cooperation on the principle of mutual respect and equal-footed consultation.
这个人类社会面临着很多的问题，但是发展的问题啊，始终是人类社会发展一条最主要的这个主线啊。那么很多的问题啊，其实都得通过发展来加以解决。所以我们在发展的过程当中呢，应该啊，这个本着发展的这个原则啊，从发展的这个目标这个角度出发啊，多做有利于发展的事情，不要把那些这个为发展呢预设一些政治化的条件，也不要为合作找这样的理由和借口啊。现在目前在世界范围之内的产业链、供应链呢，这方面存在一些问题和隐患，其实就是缺乏真诚合作的一种表现，也是这个地区的一些冲突、一些动荡给带来的一些麻烦和苦恼。
Human society is indeed faced with a lot of challenges, but even in such a situation, the topic of development is eternally the most important one for human society. And it provides a solution to the multiple challenges facing humanity. And in promoting development, we need to proceed from a position or perspective of development. We need to make efforts that are in the interest of development and avoid setting up political prerequisites for development or making any excuses to hinder development. Actually, the fact that the world is facing multiple challenges in global supply chains and industrial chains is a symptom of a lack of willingness for development and some regional turbulences.
现在世界上有很多这个发展的倡议，很多所谓的蓝图和规划，但是其实我们认真的回味一下或者反思一下，就不难发现，很多东西啊都是这个空谈，其实都没有落到实处啊。那哪些东西是落到实处呢？其实这个今天的各位嘉宾呢，和我们所有的这个参与的这个同事啊，认真的分析一下、研判一下，也不难找到答案。
If we look at the world today, it's not difficult to see that the world is not in shortage of some development initiatives or blueprints. But if one takes a harder look into these blueprints or initiatives, it's not difficult to see that some of them are simply empty talk and they are not translatable into tangible benefits. And I don't think it's difficult to see which ones can be translated into tangible benefits if the experts and participants today will do some research and talk into them.
所以在这个世界发展的过程当中啊，特别是在当今这个百年未有的这种大变局啊，这种新冠肺炎疫情的这个冲击和影响之下，又是面临着当前经济还没有完全复苏的情况之下，那么我们觉得呀，任何一种倡议啊，都应该是本着相互尊重的原则，是吧？本着真诚合作的态度啊，都要考虑到啊，这个各个合作的方，这个他的这个具体的一些情况，是吧？都应该拿出合作的这个真诚本意来，然后至于这样啊，这个合作才有意义。合作的一些目标呢，也才有可能实现。所以我们对于G7提出的所谓的一些在基础设施方面的一些新的一些想法呀，我个人认为啊，主要的还不能够仅仅是说一说 唱唱高调，而且是应该能够刚才说到的，能就是付诸实施，是吧？让有关各个方面都能看得到，都能够感觉得到，都能够这个享受、领略得到，这才是一个负责任一个倡议。
We are still living in a world with changes unseen in a century and a still unchecked pandemic, and the world economy is still yet to recover. In such a world, we believe any initiatives proposed need to be under the principle of mutual respect and equality. And any such initiatives need to take into consideration the national realities and conditions of the participating countries. And these initiatives need to be sincere in their attitude towards promoting cooperation. And only in this way can this cooperation be translated into reality. And our attitude towards the PGII, the initiative proposed by G7, as I mentioned, is that we cannot be satisfied with simply talking. Instead, it's only going to bring tangible benefits to the countries relevant to the initiatives once they are implemented into reality.
中国的发展呢，这个我们不是为了谋求霸权，我们发展也不是为了取代哪一个国家啊，我们追求的呢，只是实现更好的一种发展的目标，让这个中国的老百姓，让世界各国的老百姓能够生活得更加幸福美满，这是我们的这个习近平主席提出的建立人类命运共同体的这个初衷和我们的这个远景。
The development of China is not to seek world dominance, nor is it to replace any other major power of the world. Instead, it's to develop ourselves better and to deliver a better life to the Chinese people and people of the world. And that is what President Xi Jinping had in mind and what China had in mind when we proposed the notion of a community with a shared future for humankind.
我不知道我刚才的这个回答呀，是不是解决了你基本关切的一些问题？谢谢。
I don't know if what I said answered the basic question of proposed by Mr. Vesterby. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it did. Mr. Jan Valender has raised his hand to speak or ask a question. Can you unmute?
是问我的吗？应该不是。Speaker.
Okay, it's still muted. Okay, we can come back to that one when problem is solved. We have any of the panels have any follow-up on what has been discussed or asked so far?
I have a quick comment on following what on PGII, and also just and working with the West. In April of this year, France and China signed a joint document on 7 new infrastructure projects, where it would be both Chinese construction and French construction, and both Chinese financing and French financing, not necessarily in France, but in other countries in Central Eastern Europe, and I think in Africa. So this is the first time I've seen in a EU-China cooperation, joint cooperation and infrastructure projects, although I think it was 2019 that Japan and China also agreed to cooperate together on the joint construction projects. And I can tell you in the UK here, we are currently evaluating something similar, because I'm doing some work for the government to actually track all this data. That's why I know about those deals. So there are examples. They're small, but they are examples of the West working with China, specific on a specific number of projects. It's less than $2 billion, but it's a start. Thank you.
Okay, I think there are other questions addressed to me, but I think we are running out of time. If there are any final...
Hussein, if I can just
yes.
follow up. on Harry's point. I think the Western China should, and I think certainly can, cooperate because they really have complementary experiences and expertise that can be brought together and integrated into different bundles or packages of ways of delivering infrastructure, because China's domestic infrastructure build-up has benefited a lot, from closely engaging with Western companies in terms of technology, standards. Just look at the high-speed train as a case study of that. So now China can bring a lot of that forward to bear on any kind of joint projects with appropriate or fitting Western companies that have established historical strong connection, like the French companies in Franco-Africa. Would be a very good geographic region where these complementary expertise, I think, can come together.
Okay, I think if people have questions which we cannot answer now, they may send it to info@brixsweden.org, the same email which you received for attending the webinar. So I think Steve can, if you want to conclude the session.
Yeah, I think it was highly effective, and the exchange was very rewarding for both all of the panelists and the participants. I think we got some clear insights into the substance of what the Belt and Road Initiative consists of. And I think Ambassador Xie has made clear that the perspective of China is mutual respect and cooperation. However, the substance of understanding between East and West depends on a functional understanding that respects and works together and not in opposition. That is a great challenge that has not yet been achieved, but in the context of the ongoing economic and infrastructure projects that are underway, we can certainly continue to see major progress in that direction. And we will continue to work for that goal in the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. We also will welcome people to again, we will have a second session to this webinar this afternoon, beginning at 1. And the first speaker will be a very well-known and important individual, His Excellency Mr. Erik Solheim, who is the former Norwegian Member of Parliament and the former UN Undersecretary General and former Executive Director of the UN Environmental Program. So I think we can continue this dialogue. It's important, and it will only help to bridge cooperation as we go forward and inform people all over the world. And I thank everybody who is participating from wherever you are for participating in this session, and hopefully ask you to join us again at 1 for the second session.
We are not closing the meeting. We just will stop the recording.